It's confusing to me. Okay. All right. Well, I guess I'll just do it this way. Good morning. Everybody hears me? Hi. So, yeah, so I'm Krystal Tantric Yogi, and I just want to introduce myself first of all and say good morning to you all. Hope you all are doing well. I am literally in my living room, which I turned into my yoga room. So, and my family is here. So I just want to warn anybody if any kids come running back behind me or whatever, because we are all at home. But I'm really happy to be here. And really enjoyed the ending of the last segment as a yogi, seeing the prenatal yoga. I think that was wonderful. But yeah, so let me introduce myself. I am a Tantra coach and a yoga teacher. I've been a practitioner of yoga and a teacher for about 10 years, give or take. I also have been practicing Tantra and sharing it, blogging about it, and coaching for about five years. So my life's mission, so y'all know my mission, is to teach people about the spiritual side of sexuality, and so people can heal and be whole, because a lot of times we don't think about our spiritual development when it pertains to our sexual energy, our sexuality, and it's just completely foreign to us because we've never been introduced to that concept. So that's basically what my mission has developed into as I've started to blog about these teachings and people have wanted me to share them with them. So a lot of people wonder how I got into this work. So I got into this work like a lot of people get into their life's mission, by seeking my own healing. I'm unique in doing, I guess, sex education in this way, in this kind of spiritual realm, in that I was not, I didn't experience any kind of acute, sexual trauma, but I was a runner and I was an athlete, and I had some injuries that pertain to my SI joint. And in trying to heal the hip injuries that I had as a competitive runner, I became a yoga teacher. I started to practice yoga. And what I started to learn is that the injuries that I was dealing with in my body weren't just physical, they were also psychological and emotional and energetic. And the energy of my body actually fed my physical body. And more importantly, as psychologists know, that usually injuries pertain to behavioral habits. So the things that you do usually lead to your physical manifestations, the decisions that you make on an everyday basis. And my injuries were pertaining to my hips. And in yoga, what you learn is that different regions of the body are governed by a different psychic center called chakras. And when it comes to the region of the hips, the psychic center that governs that area is your sexual center. That is your sacral center, or your sexual chakra, your second chakra. That's the psychic center that governs the hips. So as I was doing, therapeutic sessions trying to realign my hips, because that's what was going on. I had imbalance in my hips. I learned that energetically I had an imbalance in my sexual center. And a lot of people don't like to use the word sex, especially when it pertains to yoga or it pertains to any type of spiritual practice. But what I learned is, as I was building awareness and healing this part of my body, sexual energy started to come up. And how did I know this? Because I would have dreams with orgasms in them without intentionally doing any kind of self-pleasure or without thinking about sex in particular. I may have been happy, I may have been content, but I was never specifically thinking about any kind of illicit sexual content sometimes when things would come up. And it was happening regularly as I built more awareness around healing my hips. So my intention was never to heal any kind of sexual trauma. It was just healing, physically my hips in order so I could be able to run, because that's all I cared about. I was in a place in my life where I was trying to figure out what my life purpose was. But I also felt like running was a stress relief, and because I was good at it, that perhaps that may have been my purpose. So my focus was really there. But my background intent was always trying to seek truth and seek the divine. And I think the combination of the two kind of led me into this kind of deeper revelation about my sexual energy being connected to my actual health and my development and my involvement in my spiritual path. So I kind of hope that makes sense for everybody. And so as I started going on this journey and having dreams and things come up about sexually, my sexual energy starting to stir up, I started to ask questions because I was completely ignorant to or new to this concept of healing my sexual energy or sexual energy coming up as I was trying to heal. So I was constantly asking questions. I was constantly searching for answers, and everybody liked to shy away from all the questions that I was asking. It was very hard to get any kind of information that seemed to relate to what I was going through. But as I continued to search online, thank God for social media in some ways, it's not all bad. I did end up, actually I ended up buying a yoni egg. So I was thinking maybe my pelvic floor needs strengthening and all this stuff. And she actually recommended me to her mentor when I started to tell her the story about my revelations and my new awareness that I had came across as I was trying to heal my body to run. And her mentor ended up being a Tantra teacher. I knew very little about Tantra, even though I was a yoga instructor, because we just don't talk a lot about Tantra, especially when it comes to sexual alchemy or sexual energy or feminine empowerment, because we don't talk about that anywhere in society very much unless you seek it out. And so I didn't know much about it. All I knew was that he could answer my questions, and I wanted to learn more about what it was that he actually taught. And so for the past few years, I have been studying Tantra and been learning a lot about myself as a woman and about the feminine divine. And that's how I got into this work. I started to share, of course, as a yogi, after I stopped running, I got on Instagram just to get some inspiration. And I got invited to do yoga challenges, and I started to participate in them. And as I would post different yoga poses, I would talk about what I was learning about Tantra, and I gained a following. So I became an influencer, and that's kind of how I got here and started to do the work that I'm doing now. So what is Tantra? Tantra is a spiritual science that believes in practices and a philosophy that is in harmony with the environment. So as spiritual beings, we all have a divine purpose. We all have a reason why our soul desired to be born on earth. At least that's what Tantra teaches, and a lot of ancient teachings teach us. And even though we're born on earth, the idea is to kind of learn more and have a path back to where we came from. So learning about God, understanding God, and expanding who we are in relation to the universe. Tantra is a spiritual practice of learning to do that through being in harmony with the environment and being in harmony with Earth. So it's a natural way of living. So this includes your sexuality. This does not exclude it. A lot of spiritual practices are about, taming your natural urges, being in control of them, and sometimes excluding them completely. But Tantra kind of teaches the opposite, that you're born a human being with senses and urges and natural instincts for a reason. You're supposed to harmonize, your natural urges with your higher intellect and with your morals and integrity for a practical path towards enlightenment. So you don't disregard the body, you don't disregard your sensuality, your sexuality, or any natural urges that you may have, any of your natural instincts, any of your lower self, people might call it. The idea is to integrate your higher and your lower self so that you can move forward strongly and be in the world and harmonize with the world, but not necessarily be the focus. The worldly things not necessarily be your focus. because God created the world. And so if you understand the world and how it works, you understand more how God works, because we are a reflection of God. And that's basically what Tantra is about. A lot of times people get caught up in the sexual aspect of Tantra because we live in a society that is so obsessed with sex because we know so very little about it. So sex and sexual energy is very kind of sticky and it's magnetizing. And so if it's suppressed or there's not a lot of information about it, and you have these natural urges that have been suppressed and not within yourself and have not been addressed and you've not been taught, it's easy to get your attention. And so people focus on that aspect of it. But Tantra is not like some sexy spirituality. There's a whole science and whole alchemy process. What's different, again, is that they include sexual energy and sexual teachings, just like other ancient cultures, which I will talk about later on, in the spiritual practices. It's not left out. Just like Yoruba culture, where you have Oshun, and they talk about fertility, and they talk about sensuality, and they talk about just the beauty of being feminine, and all of those things are included in the Yoruba culture. Is an aspect of our human psychological, emotional, and spiritual development as beings. And so Tantra brings the sexual energy aspect into play when you're talking about creating a spiritual life. And it's very, and when you're talking about sacred practices that include sexual alchemy, why is it so essential to the Tantra practices? Because it's such a big aspect of our lives. It's literally, sexual energy is the energy that creates everything. It's the energy that kind of keeps everything connected. So it's a really important part of who we are, how we got here, and how we move forward in our lives. So we need to be able to understand it and use it for our benefit because it's there. There's other ways of kind of getting around sexual energy or sensuality or our natural urges, but it makes the path much, much, much harder. It's much easier to, you still have to be extremely disciplined, but you get where you're trying to go by integrating that part of yourself as a whole being instead of trying to exclude it. You know, you get much further trying to understand it, especially as women. So what I want to talk about next. So Tantra helped me understand. Okay, so that's what Tantra is, and that's, you know, and that's how the story of kind of how I got into teaching Tantra. So and it comes to my topic, the thing that I want to get into is how Tantra kind of helped me understand my sexuality beyond just what I was taught, as far as like, you know, what I'm supposed to do with my body and what I'm not supposed to do with my body. It was the only thing that answered my questions again when I was on my path to healing. It was the first time that I was introduced to the idea that sexuality and sexual energy, etc., you know, was essential to connecting and understanding who God was within me, and also who God was, you know, in comparison to the universe. Like, how does sexual energy and how does sexuality actually fit in to us as spiritual beings and to the existence of God? Like, that was the first time I was introduced to my sexuality being sacred outside of just saving myself for marriage. And it helped me understand what I was going through when I was having these dreams and orgasms and things like that, when I was just physically just trying to heal my body and I really wasn't that concerned about sex at all. It helped me kind of come to grips and understand what that was all about, because I was never exposed to any of that. So for you all, if y'all have like a pen and paper, I want y'all to think about your studies when it comes to sexuality and sexual energy, and being essential to your spiritual development as a human being. You know, like, think about and reflect on what were you taught about sexuality, and if it had a spiritual side. Were you taught anything that had to do with the spiritual side? Like, what did you learn? And I just want you to take the time to just jot that down for a second and reflect. What did you learn? Or you can share What did you learn? Somebody said, such a needed conversation. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. The only spiritual connection made, I can only, I don't know how to bring back those comments. I'm not used to this platform. Well, hopefully y'all can see each other's comments. Yeah, I want you to reflect on what you've been taught. Only that I needed to keep my legs closed. I can only read half of the comments. I'm sorry. I tried to click on it. Yeah, you know, yeah, growing up was taught that you should, here we go. Taught that you should wait till marriage and it was shared between husband and wife. Everything else was considered sin and shameful. Sex was taught a bit, not sexuality. Yes, keep the legs closed, wait till marriage. Yeah, yeah. So I was taught something very, very, very similar. Books, boys. I'm easy. I'm easy or a sinner if you have sex with. Yeah. God, dog it. I hate this. I'm not used to this. Hopefully y'all can see each other's comments. But we basically, yeah, I feel like we're saying the same thing. I wasn't taught anything. Not to have sex on my period. Oh, taught that sex is beautiful with something. Hold on. Sex is beautiful with someone you love. Oh, that's a good thing. Not to have sex on my period. Wasn't taught anything. Learned from watching TV in my grandma's family room. But everyone was asleep. I can relate to that too. I think my first sexual experiences, I shared this in the sex doula training, is that, you know, was seeing something on TV when I was like 3 years old in the bed with one of my little friends. Learned from reading books. Right, and I'm not even talking about doing your own research. I'm talking about things that you were taught, either from media, from your family, from religion, spiritual practices. I want you to reflect on those things. So when I was having these spiritual experiences and these dreams and things like that, Tantra was the first thing that kind of gave me some reference to what that stuff was. Also, so I not only studied Tantra, I also studied Taoism, which is ancient Chinese kind of form of Tantra. I also studied African spirituality. And what I found that all of these teachings had in common is that they were very adamant about the harmony between masculine and the feminine divine, and the fact that there was a feminine divine, the fact that there was this concept of a goddess and not just a god, that there was importance to have logic and rationale, but also to be intuitive, that the orgasm was not just something that was a physical reflex, but it also was energetic. It also was a state of consciousness, which explained why I was having dreams without being touched, or having arousal without being physically touched. That it expands the mind. It also gave a sense that what women in general were very important when it came to learning the sacred arts of sensuality, that we played an important role, and a lot of our empowerment was in our eroticism, and our eroticism was an extension of our spirituality all by itself, without being desired by a man, without a man triggering certain things. We were an erotic entity all by ourselves and within ourselves. Our womb was a creative powerhouse, energetically. All of those things I was taught, and I also learned that there was ways to cultivate this energy and use it for my own fulfillment and manifestation in the type of life that I wanted, and drawing whatever kind of partner I wanted, and also cultivating the masculine divine and and you know, and harmonizing with the masculine energy that was around me. That's what I learned. And that was a common thread in teachings from Native Americans, from Africans, from ancient Chinese, and from Dravidians, the Black Indians, and Tantra, which came after the Black Indians or the Dravidians. I learned all of that. And so I started to wonder, like, okay, what happened to these teachings? What happened to these teachings? Why aren't they taught today? And I'm like you. I mean, the things that I learned about sex and sexuality was basically things not to do. So it was, don't have sex before you get married. Don't get pregnant before you get married. Don't get STIs. Don't have sex with someone who is broke. Don't be unladylike. Don't be a slut. So, you know, it tells me all these things not to do, but it doesn't, they didn't tell me any of those things that I talked about with cultivating my spiritual energy that I learned from Tantra, right? So like I didn't have the tools to really know what to do with my sexual energy other than keep myself sacred for a man, I guess. Or I guess, you know, I was learning that if you were with the same sex, then you basically went to hell. So I'm going to hell, you know, because I was with someone of the same sex. So,
hey, Krystal. This
yeah.
is Amy. This is Amy. I'm going to read the questions to you when they pop up. So if you want to just say, hey, are there any questions? And I'll read them to you, okay?
Okay, great. All right. How much time do I have? 10:08. Okay. Yeah. So I began to wonder what happened to these teachings that actually were helping me as I was evolving as a woman, and the things that were naturally coming up without me knowing anything. Because that's the funny thing, when you really start to seek truth and you start to, and see, the thing you should also understand is that when you start practicing yoga, yoga is an ancient practice. So it brings about a different kind of awareness within you than if you're just going exercising or if you're just going to church. You have this mind-body connection. And so there's this inner wisdom within your body that has existed for ages. There's wisdom in your DNA because you come from your parents, and your parents come from their parents, and their parents come from their parents, that you hold in your subconscious mind, in your DNA. And there's tests that have shown this. You know, neuroscientists have taken rats and they've trained them to spin on, you know, some little, you know, wheel that they run on, or do certain little things, and they'll die and they'll have children, and they'll inherently, instinctually know the same things that their parents were trained to do without them showing them, like they've done science on these things. So we have like a universal knowledge, like that's in our bodies, because our bodies literally come from God. Like, you know, the embryo and all of that stuff, it comes from, you know, our parents, but our parents, all of that goes back to the divine, the way the earth was made and all this stuff. So we have this knowledge within us. So when you tap into kind of ancient teachings like yoga, you start to tap into that stuff through your body because it brings up stuff. And so I started to wonder, I was like, okay, well, all the stuff I'm learning now is great, but it would have been great to have learned this such a long time ago, you know. And so what happened to these teachings? Why aren't they teaching this stuff now? Why, during a time where we need it most, during the Me Too movement, and with women are trying to be sexually liberated, and you've got social media and you've got online dating, and there's kind of this sexual liberation, but there's no guide to how to cultivate our own energy before we just put ourselves out there. How do we protect ourselves? How do we manifest the lives that we want and be sensual beings? How do we find the balance between all of this stuff? Well, the reason why this is so confusing is because our education is incomplete, and there actually used to be teachings that helped us navigate learning all of this stuff, because our ancestors knew that it was important, and they knew that there would be chaos and havoc and issues if we didn't address such a huge part of our spiritual being. That's my daughter. So this gets me into the topic. Oh, let me ask if there's any questions. Please ask. or they said they would let me know if there's any questions as I go along the way. Okay.
No questions at the moment, Krystal, but Tiffany said that it's so very true for me. I have unlocked so much on the mat. And I'm not sure if I'm going to say their name right, but Aquaba Mama and Wellness said meditation and yoga will reveal so much. Speak that truth. Thank you.
Great, yeah. So this gets into my topic. I wrote down so much. Was hot. Okay. So this gets into my topic, and my topic was understanding cultural appropriation and its connection to rape culture, the importance of preserving our ancestral teachings. So I talked about the ancestral teachings, but the point is, like, okay, so we had all these previous teachings that are helping me now. What happened to them? How did we get to a place in society where somehow we went from ancestral teachings that were holistic to completely just don't have sex till you get married, or you're a slut if you do this or that? How did we get there? Like, what happened? And so I'm a big believer that what happened is what happens with a lot of ancestral teachings is they get stolen, they get whitewashed, they get manipulated, and they get turned into different things because of personal vendettas. And this is what happened with our sacred teachings that came from our ancestors. I'm being nice and kind of calling it cultural appropriation. So what is cultural appropriation? Cultural appropriation is defined as the adoption of elements of one culture by members of another culture, especially when members of a more dominant culture appropriate from a disadvantaged or a minority culture. So let's break down that. So what is culture? The culture is defined as the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively, or the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social groups. Okay, so that's what we consider in general to be culture. What's appropriation? Appropriation is the action of taking something for one's own use, typically without the owner's permission. And so basically this has happened throughout history to many teachings that our ancestors have had. And this is what's happened with our sacred art teachings, our sensual art teachings, our sexual teachings. And in ancient cultures, whether it was Egyptian, whether it was ancient India, Native American, they all had temples, priests, priestesses, teachers, instructors that treated sexual teachings like they were arithmetic, like they were astrology, like it was any other subject that you would go and study seriously with lots of respect, and held in high regard because they knew it was important for society, and not just the reproductive aspect or the protection aspect, but also the pleasure aspect, the psychological aspect, and the spiritual aspect that I mentioned before. And what happened is that at some point along the way, you had the Victorian age, you had the Middle Ages, you had imperialism, you had people wanting to build monarchies. And a lot of these were Eurocentric cultures. And so what they would do is they would see these temples, they would see these priests, they would see these different teachers, they would observe the culture, they would take what they wanted to take, they would take these people's intellectual property, is what my teacher likes to call it, and they would take some of it, whatever they liked about it, and then they would whitewash it or filter it or sometimes destroy complete teachings entirely. And they would create what they thought was their scripture, and they would spread it And then they would dominate other cultures and say, this is what you're supposed to believe, this is what you're supposed to know. And any of you, I mean, probably the most dominant spiritual practice in the United States is Christianity. And I have nothing against Christians per se, not at all. But if you think about when it comes to matters of sexuality, what have you been taught spiritually about sexual energy or sexuality, or how to protect yourself as a woman, or how to cultivate your own energy so that you know it's for yourself? Because I'm all for celibacy. If it's what you want, I'm all for waiting till you get married if what you want. But what are you supposed to do as a woman to take care of yourself and your sexual energy on the spiritual side? What have you been taught from Christianity to do that? What have you been taught to prepare yourself to be a wife and engage in sensual practices with your husband? What exactly in the Bible, in the spiritual teachings, shows you or tells you anything about that? What does it tell you about how to empower yourself spiritually through your sensual energy? What does it tell you about that in any of these teachings, any of these big religions? Not much. Did they not exist? No, yes, I'm telling you, they did exist. Were there other things in Tantra or Africa? You know, and this is of course a completely different subject that could take hours and hours to teach, but there were parts about fertility, about creativity, about social, about, you know, being social beings and being spiritual beings that were taken from these ancient practices. Yes, sexuality was taken out. And if you think about the Victorian era and how they saw women and how they saw Middle Ages or the Christian Crusades, the idea was to control people and to believe, and to get them to believe in a kind of very patriarchal type of God. A man that was sitting on a throne and told you what to do, gave you the 10 commandments and let you know what it is. There was no need for you to understand any kind of goddess or any kind of feminine energy or any kind of divine sensual energy or sexual energy to be empowered in that way, because they wanted to build monarchies and they wanted civilization to be controllable and they wanted to promote capitalism. So this is why they streamed some things out, filtered some things out, because they had a personal vendetta. And this happens all the time, and this continues to happen with teachings today. I mean, one of the reasons why I came up with this whole topic, because it was very, very random, is that I saw a young lady on Instagram. She was a yogi who has tons of followers because she has a beautiful posture practice, asana practice, which is actual postures. You know, she can bend her bodies in very acrobatic ways. But she was explaining how she was taking a new training where she was shaking her butt, and basically she was twerking in yoga poses. She didn't call it twerking, she called it some kind of active release of stress, you know, some kind of Eurocentric term. Little did she know that twerking stems from, you know, African fertility dances and sensuality dances, not necessarily sexuality, but sensuality dances in Africa and ancient Africa. In many countries, even still now. I just read a book on female pleasure and female ejaculation from the Rwandan culture. They celebrate sensuality in women and the movement of women and the sensual movement of women and the curves. Well, she was explaining how she was releasing stress through shaking. It's called trauma shaking or something, some Eurocentric term that they gave twerking. And she was saying that how it was helping her relieve stress, and, you know, she had this big epiphany. Well, that's cultural appropriation. You are taking something that was meant to be sensual, that was meant to cultivate the feminine divine, and turned it to something that is a stress reliever, and is something that has to do with more to do with, you know, something that has more to do with a clinical terminology of releasing stress is what I'm trying to say, without giving it the full meaning of the spiritual feminine divine. And the problem that I have with that is not just that it's completely not giving credit to the intellectual property of other cultures and where this comes from, but you're also taking away the meaning. You're taking away the importance of the feminine divine and being able to be a sensual woman. Because a lot of times our issues do not stem from just the physical stress of dealing with bills and kids and things like that. It also is suppressing who we actually are and being able to be okay with who we are. A lot of that girl's problem in shaking her butt, even though she just thinks she's probably has anxiety issues and all of this stuff, is not being able to be okay with her sexual being. She probably has a lot of shame, and who knows, may have been molested, may have been abused, and has not completely healed her sexuality as a woman, being okay with being sensual and tapping into that part of herself. Because when you disregard the sensual aspect of who you are not whole. So until you understand that it's okay to be that, because that's naturally who you are going to be fighting against yourself. And when you fight against yourself, it causes anxiety, it causes depression. They've completely taken the spiritual aspect out of that, though, and taught it as something else. They've whitewashed it. And so this is the problem when you take someone's culture out of context, when you take their ancestral teachings and you take what you want to out of it, and you're leaving out, important parts that keep us whole. So it's like junk food. I like to compare it to junk food. Like I did a video on how I feel about porn. And I said porn is like junk food, right? This is what happens with our ancestral sacred teachings, sexuality teachings. They become junk food. What happens with junk food? They take natural foods from the environment, they process it down to where they rip away all the fiber, they rip away all the vitamins and the nutrients that are actually healthy for us. They add chemicals and preservatives and all that stuff that stimulates your taste buds and keep the shelf life of foods extremely long. They put colors on it, makes it look really pretty. It becomes addictive, but it gives no nutrient to the actual body. So what does it do? It makes you feel satiated for a moment. Usually, it puts your hormones in your gut and everything else out of whack. And then your body has nothing to feed off of, so you just want more of it because it stimulates your taste buds and it completely confuses your whole body. And this is what happens with sexuality and sexual teachings. You have stuff like porn, you have stuff like Victoria's Secret, you have all these little romantic novels and romantic movies, and you have all these great sex tips and these clinicians, which some sex education, I guess, is better than none. I don't know. It's kind of like saying junk food is better than not having any food at all. It's going to kill you one day, but at least it's sustaining at the moment. Like it's not efficient. It's not helpful. And it leaves us incomplete, and it leaves us confused. I mean, if you really think about the world that we live in, we're so compartmentalized, and the way we're taught sex is so stripped down to just basically junk that we're obsessed over it, but we're told that we're not supposed to like it. There's so much shame around our bodies, but then we want to be comfortable with our bodies, and then we want big boobs and big butts. We go to church, and then we go to the club and we shake our ass. Like we have to get high and drunk in order to really enjoy sex and be completely liberated. There's a huge orgasm gap between men and women. 1 in 3 women in their lifetime are usually going to experience some kind of sexual assault. 1 in 5 women are more than likely to be raped at some point in their life. These are actual statistics. So this is what we have gotten from cultural appropriation, and this is leading to the next part of my topic. This cultural appropriation, taking someone else's culture and changing it for your own use, to make money, to sell products, and leaving out the spiritual aspect of it that makes us whole beings, that helps develop us as mature people. What does it do? It creates a society that cultivates rape culture. Okay,
Hey, Krystal.
Yes.
I don't want to interrupt you. You're on a roll, but you have some questions coming through.
Oh, okay. Yeah. What questions do I have?
Okay, so let's see. Brianna said, wanted you to repeat or say the name of the book you read?
I don't have the time to bring it.
It's okay.
I will, if you DM me on Instagram or email me might be a better way, and I can send you the book that you're talking about. My email is krystaltantricyogi@yahoo.com.
And then Aquaba Mama and Wellness said, what are your thoughts on how we manifest and embrace our spiritual power through our sexuality?
Okay, how do we do that? Yeah, so that's like a whole workshop in class, you know. We take sexual trainings and things like that. But that's what I'm getting into with my topic, is that we have to bring back the ancient teachings. You have to learn. There's actual practices that help you do that. And one really simple way that we start in Tantra is through yoni breathing. And we might try a little bit of that here, because I'm going through a lot of what I'm talking about fairly quickly. So we might try it. But this is what I'm trying to explain to people. There's practices that already teach you how to do that. And so you have to delve back into those practices. You have to get with teachers like me and Tracy and people that already study this stuff, and you have to learn it. We've got to bring it back. We have to reintegrate it back to into society. That's the only way, because there's people who already have studied this stuff. Like our ancestors knew, and it wasn't just something that they knew because life just was crazy. We're like, okay, these people have serious issues with their sexuality. They're raping people. They're running around doing all this stuff. We need to learn the spiritual side of sexuality. We need to understand how to take care of women and treat them right. No, with Tantra and all of these other cultures, they observed nature. They observed how things worked. And what they observed about the female is that her fertility was directly connected to her spirituality. They discovered that her creativity and her insight and her connection with the divine was directly connected to her sexuality. And you know that just from her being able to birth a human being. She was a connection between the energetic realm, or some might say the spiritual realm, and the physical realm through her womb. Like, you just saw it. Women had babies, so they had a direct connection to the divine. How did the babies get here? They got here through sex. They eventually had to learn that, and they eventually had to learn the male's role in women, you know, being able to bring a baby into the world. But obviously women kind of had this kind of miraculous gift, and it was connected to their eroticism. It was connected to their sexuality. And so they seen it as something sacred, and they just recorded it. And and there's all kinds of sexual secrets and alchemy practices that they developed scientifically through observation. That's how you learn. Science is just knowledge. Like, that literally, I think, is the main definition of science. It's knowledge. Now, you know, in European science, they've broken it down to, it's gotta, you know, pass, you know, the scientific method, and physically there has to be these numbers that equal this and that. But there is an energetic side to science, and they know this too. They know this through physics. They know this through kind of the higher quantum physics and the higher levels of science, that everything that you see is not all that there is to what is. There is the wind that you cannot see. You can only see it when it moves things. There's energy, there's particles, there's atoms, there's things that you can't see that actually exist. Well, actually they can be seen. They can be seen. Other realms can be seen in the subconscious mind. They can be seen through dreams. They can be seen through microscopes. But we don't all have the ability to see them, you know. But these were direct observances from hundreds and hundreds of years that was recorded. And so we have to bring that back. What has happened is it's been whitewashed and filtered, and it, you know, we have lost these teachings, but we have to find them. We have to bring them back. Because if we don't, which goes into the next part of my topic, is how does this relate to rape culture? So first of all, let us define what rape culture is. So rape culture is defined as the sociological concept for a setting in which rape is pervasive and normalized due to societal attitudes about gender and sexuality. So our ideas around sexuality and around gender are what determine how safe or not safe it comes to us as women and children and young boys and men when it comes to rape and molestation and abuse. If there is no respect for the feminine divine, if there's no respect for a woman's sensual being, if there's no respect for her eroticism as it relates to the spiritual side of who she is, all of it's shame, all of it's wrong, all of it's only done in the dark. Her sensuality, her sexuality is not her own. It's only meant for a man, or the vulnerable period, because you have young children that get raped and molested. If sensuality and sexuality is not seen as something spiritual and something sacred, then it's just used whenever. It's just treated however. It's like junk food, you know, it's not good for you, so you use it however you want to, and whoever's the most powerful, whoever is has the most money, whoever has the most strength can do whatever with it, whatever they want, because it's nothing special anyway. It's nothing to be considered with high intentions. So it's treated and regarded or disregarded, and however you seem deemed fit, whoever is in power, you know. So that's what happens. That's what happens when these teachings that were once were sacred, that were about harmonizing men and women's energies, that seen it as high teachings. Sorry, that's my daughter, she has autism. When it's disregarded, you're left with a culture that that promotes sexual abuse and sexual assault and sexual trauma, because people don't know what to do with it other than treat it like it's something shameful and something bad anyway, so who cares? You know, you're not going to heal people, and you're not going to cultivate a society by continuing to just throw people in jail. It helps, and they should be in jail. They should be under the jail when people hurt people, especially in that way that psychologically affects them for the rest of their lives. But it's not going to change what's going on until people see their sexuality differently. How do you do it? You have to bring back these teachings. People have to learn the spiritual and sacredness of sexuality. So I'm gonna pause here, see if there's any questions.
Yes, ma'am, you have a couple. Okay, so Corian wants to know, what is a good age to start teaching the youth about sensuality and sexuality?
I think you have to take your children's lead. And one of the things I was going to mention too is that if you were to make a list of all the things that you learned about sexuality that were things to do versus things not to do, and reflect on it and see how it served you, what would you say? Would those be teachings that you would pass down to your children? How did they help you in your development as a woman as you grew older and started to have experiences? Was the idea of staying celibate till you're married, did that work for you? Was the idea that your sexuality was only meant for someone? How did that serve you well? And would you pass those teachings down to your children? So I think in thinking about how you grew up in the society that we live in, and how you, and what age per se you would teach your children certain things, I think any age could be appropriate, just depending on what your child has been exposed to and the personality of that child. But you teach them age appropriate things. You teach them things that naturally come up. So for instance, when I'm gonna have to go back and look at those other questions. So for instance, I was exposed to some very sexual content when I was 3 years old because something was left on TV. What I think would have been helpful for me at that age is if my mother, when I told her what I saw, because she told me that I did tell her, I don't remember, is her explaining what the pleasure side of sexuality, to let me know that this is what women do when they're in love and they're in a committed relationship. They hug and they kiss, and it could result in having children. But that was because I was exposed to that content early and I was comfortable with it. You have to know your children. I don't think there's necessarily a particular age or not. Some of us just come here with a little bit, of more eroticism and curious about those types of things. I knew that I had a friend that said she started doing Kegels when she was probably 5 or 6 years old and she didn't know what they were. She just knew that they felt good. And for those of y'all who may not know what Kegels are, the contractions of the pelvic floor and the vaginal canal, like she was doing that naturally. Some kids explore themselves early. Some kids get exposed to content early. So what's important is for you to be comfortable with your sexuality, for you to learn these teachings, delve into these teachings, and for you to, things that didn't feel right growing up, you need to address those things. Do not be quiet, explore them, come to workshops, come to find books, find resources. I'll give you guys books. I have, if you go to my Instagram page, I have a list of books. The issue is you really do kind of need to be taught these things because there's so much information that's been stripped away and you can't really learn on your own. Even I have a teacher. So when it comes to age, it could be as young as 3 years old, or it could be 12 years old. It just depends on where your kid is at. You have to pay attention to your kids. That's why you got to be in their lives. But the shame and the energy, or not having shame, or the energy that you come from, the authentic place of being comfortable with your own sexuality, your own sexual energy, and understanding what that is going to make all the difference. With kids, it's not always about what you talk about or what you do. It's how you do it. It's your intention. It's your perspective. It's your energy and how you feel about it and what they pick up on from you. It's the feelings around it. When you define something for a child, words don't mean a whole lot. It's the example that you set with those words. So you could say, I could say that this is an apple. We know it as a water bottle, but I could say it's an apple to a child. To them, an apple is going to be something where they drink something that refreshes their throat. So if you talk about sexuality, you talk about private parts, it's how you talk about them and what the intentions are and the purpose. You have to learn that yourself. And you also have to know your child. So, it really is relative, I think, the age.
And then you have another one that
okay.
says, how does one remove, or Anya wants to know, how does one remove the shame and guilt that has been taught from sex?
Yeah, you have to, and this is where I go back to learning the ancestrals' teachings. You have to understand sexual energy on a deeper level than what you've been taught. You literally have to throw away everything, almost everything that was not positive, and give positive and negative is relative, but you kind of have to throw away everything that you've learned about sex and start with a fresh slate. And you have to, being where you are, in your understanding about spirituality, you have to seek truth in what that really means as far as creative energy. You have to not just see it as something that you've seen in porn. Like, you have to really, and this is why I wanted y'all to write down and reflect what you have learned and what has served you, what versus hasn't served you. You have to go back now as a mature woman, just like you would with clothes that you bought, or friends that you've had or family members, or things that you eat. And you have to say, what has served me well and what hasn't? Okay, this has served me well. Let me go more in this direction and explore this more. So I really think bringing purpose, high purpose and high intent to learning about your sexuality and reflecting on your own sexual history, unpacking, trauma in a safe environment, and learning ancient teachings that actually teach you about the spiritual side of sexuality will help you evolve as a person. Understand that sexuality is a part of your spiritual development. It's a part of an aspect of consciousness. And if it's not matured, if it's not nurtured in the correct way, what happens is it becomes something that works against you instead of something that works for you. And it's a very, very broad topic, and it takes time.
Hey, Krystal.
Yes.
Don't mean to interrupt again, but I just want to let everyone know that I have posted all of your social media handles in the chat box. So if anyone wants to know how to follow you, it's all there. Your IG, your YouTube, and your Facebook. And then your email is there too. And then just 5 minutes until the next presenter comes up.
Yeah, that kind of by fast. Yeah, so the only thing I want to round up in saying is that So having this information, of course, this conversation could go on, and there's lots of, this is a very, very, very broad topic that I brought up, but because I had saw that chick on Instagram, it pissed me off, and I wanted to talk about this when Tracy asked me about it. But so what do we do? What do we do? We need to bring back these ancestral teachings. We need to look for them. We need to respect them. We need to hold people accountable when we see cultural appropriation, when we know it, once we've learned what our ancestral teachings are. You know, when we see people taking bits and parts of teachings and not teaching them holistically because it's dangerous. We also need to encourage diversity when it comes to sex education. We need to have more forums like this, solely dedicated to sensuality and sensual empowerment and sex education. We need to have people of all different backgrounds. We need Asians, we need Native Americans, we need African Americans, we need Africans, we need people, we need people from different religious groups. We need everybody to come together, and whether they are scared to talk about it or not, we need them to talk about their cultural practices, because all culture is not good. We have, you know, we have genital manipulation and things that are going on that are not good. We need to talk and have forums with women about sexuality. We need to promote diversity among sex educators so we can hear people's perspective and hear them explain their culture and why they do things that they do. So that's the other things that we need to do. We also, just as women, need to be cognizant when we are taught something that doesn't intuitively feel good to us. So like I was saying before, we are our ancestors. The teachings are in us. So when things do not resonate with us, there's a reason. If something you're taught about sex seems biased, if it seems one-sided, if it seems like it's leaving you out, if it's leaving out pleasure and you understanding how to enjoy your own orgasms, and that feels incomplete to you, and it feels like sex is not worth it, and all of this stuff, there's something wrong. Like, we need to bring these things up when things are being taught that does not resonate with us as women, as the educators, and as students, and as readers, and of people that are constantly receiving propaganda. Like, we need to speak up and say things that don't resonate with us, because we are ancestors, and when you do that, it will lead you to your ancestral teachings. I'm not here because my mom taught me about this stuff. I'm here because intuitively I started to recognize that something was wrong, or something was incomplete, or something was missing. Okay. So we didn't get to try yoni breathing, but yeah, that's basically what my talk is about. I hope all of that stuff made sense. My information is up, and you can find me on Instagram and YouTube, and I'm Krystal Tantric Yogi. On Instagram is Krystal_Tantric Yogi, and yeah, that's it. I hope y'all enjoyed the talk. And the person that is next is